A follow-up to something you said, Michael. Can you paint a picture of how the way of Jesus is truly competent in public life? What are a few specific competencies that we can bring?
So, wonderful question. I've been for the last 6-7 years, I've been asking audiences at my events. Dallas Willard had a definition of joy. He defined joy as a pervasive and constant sense of well-being. And I'd ask audiences, how many of you would define our politics as being full of a pervasive and constant sense of well-being? And of course, it's a laugh line. Now, how many of you would say that the posture that you bring to politics is full of a pervasive and constant sense of well-being? Well, joy is a competency. If the world is truly a safe place in which to follow Jesus, then that has political implications in our posture for the kinds of the policies and the form of our activism, what we're willing to do and what we're not willing to do. It affects how we take a loss and how we pursue a win. Hope is much the same way. Forgiveness, mercy. These are all resources that we have to bring to the public. I don't mean to bring up a partisan figure, but after Charleston, after the shooting in Charleston, I'm convinced that Barack Obama made the boldest theological proclamation of any American president in recent memory, which is that he walked into a church that had just been devastated by the murder of 9 of its folks, 9 of its members, including its pastor. And he said, this might be an opportunity. This might be an opportunity for God's grace. That imagine President Bush in the wake of Hurricane Katrina saying that this might be an opportunity for God's grace. I mean, the boldness to step into that environment and say that there are possibilities with God, even in the darkest of moments, to make the next appropriate step is profound. And that is the kind of opportunity and possibility that Christians can bring to our neighbors in what seems today like a very dark and entrenched time in our political life. And the last thing, we've already touched on it, but Jamie Smith, the philosopher, the Christian philosopher out of Calvin, he talks about 2 things. He talks about what he says Christian political participation should be accompanied by a tinge of ambivalence. And I just think that is precisely right. And he wrote this in his book about political theology. So James Smith is no quietist, but a tinge of ambivalence. Then the second thing he says is that we need to de-escalate our politics, not to make it unimportant, but to make it penultimate. The problem with our politics is not that people take it too seriously. The problem is that we take it seriously in all of the wrong ways. So all of these things, we could go on. I mean, inexhaustible resources the Christian faith has to offer, practical, historical, intellectual, institutional, and we need to think as spokespeople for Christ about what it means to offer these things as resources to the public.
Great, David. So this will be the last question because we unfortunately have 3 minutes. We could keep going on forever. This is amazing. If you were to break up and rename the evangelical voting bloc, how would you do it?
The voting bloc.
That's what the question said. Yes.
So that raises a really interesting point. I mean, the voting bloc the white evangelical voting bloc is a God and country voting bloc. I mean, that's what it is. Because what we have to discern is we've got 2, when we use the word evangelical, you have to understand you have an exit poll definition and you have a theological definition. So the exit poll definition just works like this. They ask your ethnicity. If you say you're white, then they ask, are you evangelical or born again? If you say yes, then you're an evangelical. Okay. Now, it also happens to be that 2/3 of white Republicans who go to church once a year or less identify as evangelical. All right, so I'm not an expert in all brands of evangelical theology, but I know that it's a very small group that is the never go to church branch of evangelical theology. And so what's going on here is that for a lot of people who identify as Christian and identify as Republican, that equals evangelical. Whether they go to church or they don't go to church, whether they're biblically literate or whether they're not biblically literate. And this is sort of the God and country conservatism. A lot of people say, oh, that's the pro-life group. No, it actually turns out that they tend to be more motivated by immigration issues than life issues, for example. So that's one set of Americans. And it's, 27, 26, 28% of Americans who are self-identified white evangelicals. And that is by and large a God and country GOP movement. As Ryan Burge, statistician from Eastern Illinois, said, white evangelicals are Republicans, Republicans are white evangelicals. But then there's another group, and these are the theological evangelicals. These are the people that would answer yes to the Barna test or follow the Bebington quadrilateral. That's a lot smaller group of people. That might be 6-7% of America of all races and ethnicities. And that's a much more politically diverse community. And so we get these two groups mixed together all the time. And so when you're talking about self-described exit poll evangelicals, that is 80+%, and that's a disproportionate 80+% GOP and disproportionately sort of God and country theology / politics. The theological evangelical, the 6 or 7%, many of them are quite Republican for sure. But it's much more much more politically mixed. And their politics flows from a bit of a different place. And so that's one of the really confusing things about our present moment. A lot of pastors who are tweeting a lot about politics, like they know a ton about evangelicals, their whole experience is with the theological evangelical. They have no experience with the non-church going evangelical. And that non-church going evangelical actually has the critical mass of political power in this coalition. And I don't think people truly understand that. Doesn't mean that we don't try to deal with stuff in our churches, but it just shows you the immensity of sort of the challenge of even defining what an evangelical is in this context.
Great. I wish we could talk more, but the clock has ended and the last sand has gone through the hourglass. So join me in thanking David and Michael. Thanks so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. And now I will hand you back to Greg Forrester. Thanks, guys. Great to see you.
Thank you very much. It's such an honor to have them with us, two people who operate at the highest levels of political discourse and practice, but who have really sacrificed to protect their Christian integrity. We're just amazed. I'm amazed to have them join us.